I'm like any other person. The fact that I'm blind doesn't mean I don't have the same desire to be active in society and seen as an active person and not as a passive person. And I think that certainly the trade union provides a channel through which I can do that, and where I can have a relationship with people, because I can actually speak about pay or conditions at work as well as anyone else.
There's power in a factory, power in the land, power in the hand of the worker. But it all amounts to nothing if together we don't stand. There is power in a union.
I suspect people don't know how many disabled people truly there are in the workforce. A lot of people will not declare themselves as disabled either to their employers or to their trade unions, because it's a disadvantage generally rather than an advantage.
The union forever defending our rights. Down with the black label workers unite. With our brothers and our sisters, many far-off lands. There
Bill Morris, Transport and General Workers Union, moving motion number 20.
It's taken over 100 years for the trade union movement to elect its first black General Secretary, and it's taken just as long for women to be seen as equals in the trade union struggle. So what are the chances of a disabled General Secretary of the TUC in the next century, or even two? Nobody knows how many disabled trade unionists there are in Britain. Only a few unions have even begun to count the number of their disabled members.
Disabled people need to and have traditionally expressed their needs through the trade union movement and through the labour movement historically. And I think there is a natural relationship, because basically our demands are relatively straightforward and simple. What we're saying is that because of the structure and the organisation of society, we're not able to take a full part in it alongside our brothers and sisters, and that therefore we want to change that society into one that's inclusive rather than exclusive.
So why are there not more disabled trade unionists? For a start, the boss might not approve.
I remember when I first started, I think they saw me as being an addition to their equal opportunities policy, really, rather than as a real worker. When within 6 months I was a shop steward, and I'd pulled the office out on strike, I think their attitude changed dramatically, and they stopped treating me as a disabled person and started treating me as a trade union activist.
But to be a trade union member, first of all, you have to have a job, and 70% of disabled people are unemployed.
To some extent, I think our demands are very simple. I mean, what we're saying as workers within the workplace is that we want to be treated in the same way as any other worker, and that basically means that if someone gives us a job to do, then we'd also ask them to give us the resources, the equipment and the support we need to do that job. And it would be very strange, for example, if you employed someone as a copy typist, but you didn't supply them with a typewriter.
A cool reception from employers is only to be expected. A disabled worker is one thing, a bolshy disabled worker quite another. But surely there'll be a welcome for disabled workers in the trade unions.
Just as workplaces aren't fully accessible to disabled people, so unfortunately, historically, trades unions haven't been fully accessible to disabled people. Unions are doing a lot to remedy that now, but there's still a long way to catch up. And so that has the effect of making it less likely that disabled people will become active trades unionists. On the other hand, a lot of disabled workers do find that when they're dealing with discrimination in the workplace, inaccessibility, outdated attitudes and so on, trades unions are very often the only way they've got of fighting back against that oppression.
Access is a big thing with me, with meetings, because I realised as I declined in my health and I started to use a wheelchair, that access was almost impossible for some buildings. And no matter how nice people are lifting you up steps, it's humiliating. I find it humiliating. And there should be access for all people. And this discriminates against people joining the union, taking part in the union.
I think the solution of practical access problems can help to address attitudes, because if people who are organising union meetings have to take account of issues like wheelchair access, like having sign language interpretation and induction loops, like producing material in different formats on cassette and in braille and so on, then that's bound to be a learning experience, and it's bound to help people to develop good practice and to know what the issues are around disabled people participating in mainstream union activities.
If you go to our National Disabled Members Conference, you'll see people's access needs being met in all kinds of ways. But how much that is reflected across Unison as a whole, I would say that's very doubtful in terms of ordinary branch buildings and ordinary regional meetings. I'd say there are still hundreds of instances, even within Unison, of people having difficulty getting access to Unison meetings and union meetings. I'm sure that's the case across other trade unions.
Once they do become involved, disabled activists can still feel they're being channelled into appropriate areas of union business.
I'm on the National Disability Forum because I am the disabled one. Of the regional committee, you're disabled, or you'll be the one to do it. You are expected to take on problems with disabilities.
While all disabled trade unionists agree that such attitudes have to be changed, how they can best organise to do so is less clear. Should disabled trade unionists organise separately from the non-disabled?
The TUC have got a disability forum, which has been meeting now for several years, but certainly at the meetings I've been to, 3/4 of the audience have been non-disabled people. And one of the things that we are very clear about as disabled people in our campaign is that it is us disabled people who must lead the campaign.
A direct parallel would be having a women's forum that consisted of men and women, and I think people's politics have progressed generally that it would be recognised that that was not necessarily appropriate, but to be having non-disabled people is still seen to be okay.
Until I think the TUC and other trade unions are willing to take a stronger stand on that and say, yes, we actually defend disabled people's right to organise themselves autonomously where it's necessary, then I don't think we're going to have a fully representative structure.
The trade union movement is rightly proud of its history of fighting for the rights of working people, but disabled people feature in that history hardly at all. The movement is dominated by white people, by men, and of course, by non-disabled people.
They're beginning to recognise women's issues, they recognise issues for black people and gays and lesbians, but they still tend to see disability as kind of a medical and a welfare issue, and indeed a lot of trade unionists actually work in professions that so-called care for disabled people, and therefore a lot of trade unionists are actually perpetuating the kind of oppression that disabled people have to struggle against.
Given all these problems, is it really worth it?
I think I'd say to any person with a disability that you've got more to gain from being a member of a trade union in a lot of ways than an able-bodied person, because the world is a lot more hostile, I think. It's a more difficult place for a person with a disability, and therefore the protection of your employment rights, your health and safety at work is a bigger issue in a sense. And the only way that you're going to do that is if you're a member of a trade union.
I think the social benefits of actually being able to meet with one another, spend time with one another, support one another, have a kind of alternative, a culture of our own which supports us is very important, and the trade union movement does provide that.
Trade unions exist to fight for people's rights in society. Many disabled people feel that society denies them their full rights. So are trade unions our natural allies in the fight?
I think that disabled people's experiences in the trade union and labour movement is very much the same as it is in the rest of society, which is that the space that exists is space that we've had to struggle for, space that hasn't come naturally, space that we've had to organise for, to campaign for, to fight for.
When a disabled worker can choose their role in a trade union and expect to be supported on a fair and equal basis, then there really will be power in a union.
The union forever defending our rights. Down with the black label workers unite. With our brothers and our